He had 9 days left to live. He didn't know that yet. Nobody did. Los Angeles, September 21st, 1955, Thursday evening. The kind of night where the air still held the heat of the day, but the sky had turned that deep California blue that made everything look like a movie. James Dean was 24 years old, and he had just done something that made him happier than almost anything else in his life. He had bought a car. Not just any car. A 1955 Porsche 550 Spider, silver, low to the ground, aluminum body, 4-cam engine. The kind of machine that didn't just move, it disappeared. 9 days earlier, Dean had walked into Competition Motors on North Vine Street, looked at the car sitting in the showroom, and felt something he rarely felt: certainty. He knew, without thinking about it, without negotiating, without calling anyone to ask their opinion. He traded in his old Porsche Speedster, signed the paperwork, and drove out into the Los Angeles sun, feeling like the world had finally become what he always imagined it could be. The car cost him $2,998. He had to borrow against his upcoming earnings to cover it. He didn't care. That Thursday night, Dean drove the Spider to the Villa Capri restaurant on North Macadam Place. Dark booths, good Italian food, people who left him alone when he wanted to be left alone. He parked outside, climbed out, and was heading for the entrance when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me." British, clipped, careful. Dean turned around. The man standing there was 51 years old, lean, with the kind of face that had seen everything and quietly judged most of it. He was wearing a dark suit. He had just come out of the restaurant himself, but something had stopped him. His name was Alec Guinness, and what happened in the next 4 minutes would haunt him for the rest of his life. You need to understand who Alec Guinness was in September 1955, because it matters. He was one of the most respected actors in the world. Precise, controlled, deeply serious about his craft in a way that made almost everyone around him feel slightly inadequate. He was not a man who said things he didn't mean. He was not a man who made dramatic gestures, which is exactly why what he said next was so impossible to explain. Guinness had noticed the car. Hard not to. It sat at the curb like something that didn't quite belong on a public street. He walked over, stood beside it for a moment, looked at the lines of it. Then he looked at Dean. "Is this your car?" Dean grinned. That grin, the one that made him look like he was 17 and had just gotten away with something. Just got it. 9 days ago. Guinness looked at the car again. He would later say he couldn't explain what happened next, that he was not a superstitious man, that he did not believe in premonitions, and yet he looked at James Dean and said, "Please don't get in this car." Dean blinked. "What?" "I have a feeling." Guinness's voice was quiet, not dramatic, not performed, just quiet and certain in the way that quiet certainty is more frightening than shouting. "If you get in this car, if you drive this car, you will be dead within a week." The street was silent. A valet 20 feet away had stopped moving. Dean stared at Guinness, and then he did the only thing a 24-year-old man who had just bought the car of his dreams could do. He laughed. "You too," he said. "Everyone keeps saying that." Guinness didn't laugh. He held Dean's gaze. "I'm not joking." "I know you're not," Dean said, and something in his voice shifted, just slightly, just for a second before the grin came back. "But I'll be fine. I'm always fine." He shook Guinness's hand, thanked him, walked into the restaurant. Guinness stood on the sidewalk, looking at the silver car. Then he checked his watch. He noted the time. He would say later, because something in him needed to mark the moment. 9 days later, James Dean was dead. But here's what nobody tells you. That wasn't the first warning. In the weeks before he bought the Spider, at least 3 people had tried to stop him. His mechanic, Rolf Wuterich, the same man who would be sitting in the passenger seat 9 days later, had told him the 550 Spider was not a road car. It was a race car, built for closed circuits and professional drivers, not California highways. Actor Nick Adams, one of Dean's closest friends, had looked at the car and said simply, "Jimmy, no," and Dean had listened to all of them. He had nodded and considered, and then done exactly what he was going to do anyway, because that was James Dean. Not reckless, never reckless, not exactly, but constitutionally unable to choose safety over aliveness. Unable to pick the cautious thing when the true thing was sitting right there in front of him. To understand why, you have to go back much further than September 1955. You have to go back to a train platform in Indiana in 1940. James Dean was 9 years old. His mother's name was Mildred. She was 26 when she got sick. A tumor, moving fast, and by the time anyone understood what was happening, it was already too late. James watched her disappear from the inside out, over months that felt like years, and one morning he woke up and she was gone. His father, Winton, was 25 years old and completely destroyed. He had a job offer in California. He had no money. He had no idea how to be a father to a grieving 9-year-old boy when he was barely surviving his own grief. So he made a decision. He took James to the train station in Marion, Indiana. He put him on a train headed east, toward Fairmount, toward his aunt and uncle, toward a life that would be nothing like the one James had been promised. There is a specific moment that people who knew Dean closely said he talked about more than almost anything else. Not the acting, not the fame. This moment, standing on that platform, watching his father get smaller through the window, his father raising one hand, not quite a wave, more like an apology. The train moving, the distance increasing, his father disappearing. James Dean was 9 years old, and the person he loved most in the world had just put him on a train and walked away. He never got over it. Every fast car, every dangerous race, every role he threw himself into so completely that the line between character and person dissolved. Every time he looked at something that scared him and walked toward it instead of away. All of it was the same thing. I am still here. I am still here. But here's what almost nobody knew about James Dean in the months before the Porsche. He was exhausted. Not physically. He was 24 years old and had the kind of energy that ran on something other than sleep. But inside, underneath the grin and the leather jacket and the casual cool that the photographers loved, he was carrying something heavy. Her name was Pier Angeli. They had met on the Warner Bros. Lot in 1954. She was 22, Italian, dark-eyed, both fragile and fierce at the same time. Dean fell completely. Not the performance of falling, completely, really, in the way that left you exposed and unable to pretend otherwise. He told friends he wanted to marry her. Pier's mother, Enrichetta, had other plans. She decided that James Dean, motorcycle riding, reckless, rootless James Dean, was not what her daughter needed. She wanted Pier married to someone safe, someone steady. Dean tried everything. He rented a tuxedo for Pier's film premiere. He showed up to family dinners. He called when he said he would call. He did all the things that didn't come naturally to him. It wasn't enough. In November 1954, Pier Angeli announced her engagement to singer Vic Damone. The wedding date was set. On the day of the ceremony, James Dean was not inside the church. He was across the street, on his motorcycle, in the rain, sitting there for the entire length of the service, engine off, watching the door through which Pier Angeli would emerge as someone else's wife. When she came out, he started the engine. He didn't look at her. He drove away. He never spoke about it directly, but the people who knew him said that after that day, something in him was different. Quieter, in a way that had nothing to do with peace. And then after the crash, when his desk was cleared, someone found something in the drawer, a marriage application, fully filled out, every blank completed in James Dean's handwriting. In every space where a name was required, he had written one word, Pier, no date, no signature. Nobody knows when he filled it out. Nobody knows if he intended to use it someday, or if he simply needed to see her name somewhere permanent, in a document that meant something, in a drawer he could open and close. We will never know. What we do know is what Pier Angeli wrote in a letter to a close friend in 1971, 16 years after Dean's death. She was 40 years old. She had divorced Vic Damone years earlier. She had been alone for a long time. She wrote, "My love died at the wheel of a Porsche. It has now been 16 years that I have been desperately lonely. I want to be with my father and Jimmy again." She died that same year, alone, in a house in Beverly Hills. She had been waiting for him, in her own way, for 16 years, and he had been stopped at a junction in California in 1955. Stop right there, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. 2 weeks before the crash, James Dean stood in front of a camera for the California Highway Patrol and filmed a public service announcement about speeding. He was in costume as Jet Rink from Giant, the film he had just finished, the one that would be released posthumously. The script called for him to say, "The life you save may be your own." Dean looked at the script, then at the director. "Can I change this?" He looked into the camera and said, "The life you might save might be mine." The director asked him to do the scripted version. Dean refused, quietly, simply, the way he refused most things. He said the line he'd come up with was more honest. "The life you might save might be mine." That's what aired. 3 weeks later, it was. September 30, 1955, Friday. Dean woke up at his house in Sherman Oaks feeling good. He had a race to get to, the Salinas Road races, up the California coast. He had the Spider, he had Wooterick riding with him, he had the whole day ahead. His friend Ursula Andress had called the night before. "Jimmy, trailer the car. Don't drive it up. It needs the miles," Dean said. "I want to feel it on the road. Jimmy, I'll be fine. I'm always fine." At 1:30 p.m., he and Wooterick climbed into the Spider and pulled out. Dean's friend Bill Hickman followed in a Ford station wagon, pulling a trailer, the trailer Dean had decided not to use. At 3:30 p.m., near Bakersfield, California Highway Patrol Officer O.T. Hunter pulled them over, speeding. Hunter walked up to the window. A young man in worn jeans, laceless shoes, white t-shirt. He had no idea who he was looking at. "You know how fast you were going." "I have a race," Dean said. "I'm trying to get there." Hunter wrote the ticket. Dean took it politely, folded it, put it in his jacket pocket. "Thank you, officer," he said, and he drove on. Hunter would say later, when journalists tracked him down, "I had no idea who he was. He was just a young man in a hurry. If I had known," he stopped, didn't finish, he didn't need to. 2 hours and 15 minutes after that ticket, at the junction of Highway 46 and Highway 41, a Ford Tudor sedan turned left across the highway. The driver was 23 years old, a Cal Poly student named Donald Turnipseed. He saw the Spider coming. He thought it would stop, or slow, because cars do that. But the Spider was doing somewhere between 70 and 85 miles per hour, and it did not stop. The collision was catastrophic. Wooterick was thrown 19 feet from the car. Dean's left foot was caught between the clutch and brake pedals. His neck was broken, his arms fractured, his jaw shattered. His last words in the fraction of a second before impact, "That guy's gotta stop. He'll see us." He didn't see them. At 6:20 p.m., James Byron Dean was pronounced dead at Paso Robles War Memorial Hospital. He was 24 years old. His greatest film had not yet been released. And here's the moment nobody talks about. When the news reached Warner Brothers Studios, a screening was in progress. Raw footage from Giant Dean's last film playing on screen, his voice filling the room. Elizabeth Taylor was 23 years old that day. She had been closer to Dean on that set than almost anyone, not romantically, but in the way that sometimes happens between two people who recognize something in each other they can't quite name. That very morning she had seen him in the studio parking lot, standing beside the Porsche, grinning, impossibly alive. "I'm going to the races," he'd told her. "Finish this film first," she said. Dean threw his head back and laughed. Then he climbed in the car and drove away. And now, on screen, his face looked back at her. Then director George Stevens stood up. He walked quietly to the projection booth. Without a word, he switched off the sound. Then the image. The room went dark. Stevens turned around. "Dean is dead." Nobody moved. Taylor ran to the phone. She called hospitals. She called newspapers. She stayed at Warner Bros. Until 9 p.m., barefoot on the cold studio floor, tears running down her face, refusing to put down the receiver, as if keeping the line open could somehow keep the news from being true. Rock Hudson, the biggest star on that set, the man who had despised Dean throughout the entire shoot, sat in a corner of the room with his shoulders shaking. Nobody had ever seen him cry. Taylor finally put down the receiver. She turned. She looked at Stevens, and everyone in the room could see the question in her eyes. "George," she said, "I can't believe this. Can you believe this?" Stevens looked at her, a long pause. Then he said it. He had it coming. The way he drove, it was inevitable. Taylor stared at him. Something broke inside her. "I got in my car," she said years later. "I drove over the canyon to my home at 100 miles an hour, in rage. I think it was maybe George's way of expressing his own grief, but those were not the words I needed to hear. 100 miles an hour, through the canyon, in the dark, in rage. She could have died that night too. But here's what you don't know about Alec Guinness. After that night outside the Villa Capri, after Dean laughed and shook his hand and walked into the restaurant, Guinness sat with what had happened for 9 days. He didn't tell anyone. He hadn't been sure what to make of it himself. A feeling, something irrational from a man who prided himself on rationality. Then the news came. He went very still. He thought about the car, about Dean's face when he said, "I'm always fine," about the exact 9 days. "I noted the time," Guinness would say in interviews decades later. He almost never talked about it. When he did, he chose each word carefully. It was 11 o'clock, or just after. "And I told myself clearly, completely, that boy will be dead within a week. I don't know why I thought it. I have no explanation for it, but I thought it. And 9 days later, it was true." He paused. "I have never gotten over it. Not the feeling of having known, and having said it, and having watched him laugh and walk away." Guinness carried that sidewalk for the rest of his life. Every time someone mentioned James Dean, every time he passed a silver sports car on a street, the warning he gave, the laugh he received in return, the 9 days in between, and now, the part of this story that no one expected. Rolf Wuthrich survived the crash, months in hospital, surgery after surgery. He was sent back to Germany in 1957, walking with a limp that would never fully go away, but he couldn't outrun what had happened. In the 1960s, he attempted suicide twice. He gave one major interview about the crash, and in it said something people who read it never forgot. "I was in that seat. Dean was in the other seat. Why did I live? I have spent 30 years trying to understand why I lived." He never found an answer. On July 28, 1981, Rolf Wuthrich lost control of his car in Kupferzell, West Germany. He crashed into a house. He was pulled from the wreckage and died at the scene. He was 53 years old, 26 years after James Dean, in a car, on a road, gone in a moment that didn't announce itself, exactly the same, as if the crash had never really ended. And the car, the little bastard? The name came from Jack Warner, the head of Warner Bros. During East of Eden, Dean had refused to vacate his trailer after his scenes were done. Warner heard about it and said, to someone not supposed to repeat it, "That little bastard needs to learn whose studio this is." Someone told Dean. Dean had the name painted on the back of the spider in red script. "Little bastard. Take what someone uses to diminish you and put it on the thing you love most. Make it yours. Make it defiant." That was James Dean. After the crash, the car was sold in pieces. The engine went into another racer's car. That driver was later killed in a crash. The tires were sold. Both cars using them were subsequently in serious accidents. The shell caught fire spontaneously in a garage. A truck carrying the chassis to a highway safety exhibition skidded off the road, killing the driver. By 1960, the remains of the little bastard vanished entirely. No museum has it. No collector has come forward. No record exists of where it went. It simply disappeared, as if it had done what it came to do, and left. James Dean was nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actor for East of Eden while he was still alive. He did not win. Giant was released in October 1956, 13 months after his death. The reviews were extraordinary. He was nominated for Best Actor, posthumously, the first actor in history to receive that honor twice after death. When his name was announced at the ceremony, the entire audience rose to its feet. He was not there to stand with them. He had been dead for 16 months. Alec Guinness lived until 2000. He was 86 years old. In his last major interview, a journalist asked if there was anything in his life he still couldn't explain. He thought for a moment. "Yes," he said, "one thing." He described the night, the car, the feeling, the words, the way Dean had laughed. The 9 days, the news. "I have no explanation for it," Guinness said. "I am not a superstitious man. I do not believe in premonitions, and yet I knew." The journalist asked, "Do you think Dean knew too?" Guinness was quiet for a long moment. "I think," he said, "that he had always known. Not on that night specifically, but in general. I think he understood, somewhere underneath everything, that he was moving at a speed that could not be sustained. And I think he had made his peace with that." He paused. "What I have never made my peace with," Guinness said, "is that I told him, and he laughed, and walked away, and I let him." He looked at his hands. "I have wondered ever since what would have happened if I had been more insistent, if I had done something other than stand there on the sidewalk and watch him go." He shook his head slowly. "But that is not the kind of question that has an answer. That is only the kind of question you carry. Alec Guinness looked at James Dean's car on a Thursday night and said, "Don't touch it. You will be dead within a week." James Dean laughed. 9 days later, at a junction in California at 5:45 on a Friday afternoon, the laugh ended, and Alec Guinness carried the weight of that sidewalk conversation for 45 years. Long after the silver car vanished, long after the woman whose name was written in every blank of an unsigned form had gone to find him somewhere else, long after the boy who had been put on a train at 9 years old had finally stopped moving, here is the question that stays with you. On that Thursday night, James Dean heard the warning. He understood it was sincere. He said, "You too. Everyone keeps saying that," which means he had heard it before, which means he knew, on some level, that the people around him were frightened, and he got in the car anyway. Not because he was foolish, not because he didn't understand what speed did to human bodies when metal stopped and momentum didn't, but because the alternative, the careful life, the safe choice, the trailer, was not something he was built to choose. He had been put on a train at 9 years old. He had spent 15 years running towards something he could never quite name. And the Porsche was the fastest thing he had ever found, so he drove, and 9 days later, at a junction where a Ford Tudor didn't see him, the running stopped. The question isn't whether Alec Guinness was right, the question is whether James Dean already knew. And if he did, what does it mean that he kept going anyway? That he woke up on September 30th, that he climbed into the car, that his last words were about someone else's failure to see him. That guy's gotta stop, he'll see us. He didn't, but Alec Guinness did, and that is the thing he could never put down.